I just found out my landlord has an arborist that just kind of showed up and is going to be doing some tree work around the house.
Yay.
So
Nice.
we'll see if there are chainsaws drowning us out.
Hey, listen, I had a jackhammer the other day. I literally had to take my thing and go to my home to do it. I was like, a jackhammer? Are you kidding me?
A
Really,
little
that's
much.
what I get today? And it was like right out my door. So,
Mm,
so Jordan K. Walker today I have on number two times. Wow. You're,
yeah.
I know. Well, this time we're going to talk a little bit different. We for the individuals who have followed our dealer diaries, they may have heard your biography in the past. And you know what episode that was? I don't remember
I
offhand.
don't remember the number now.
Yeah, I don't either. But it wasn't that long ago. So my first question is, what's the K for?
Oh, that's my middle initial. Jordan Kyle Walker.
Okay.
The reasoning being that when I first started kind of getting my name out there,
Right.
I was doing it in the sci-fi world, and there were
Uh,
four other Jordan Walkers doing sci-fi and fantasy art, so I needed to differentiate myself a bit.
well, there's no Jordan Walkers doing it in art. So do you ever consider going, do I keep the K or do I not? Guess I mean, it's your name. I'm just curious.
Yeah. At this point, I'm just kind of used to it. So
Yeah.
I'm used to using it in my professional stuff, but I might drop it eventually. We'll find
Yeah.
out.
From a standpoint of a dealer, just thinking about it in the future,
Hmm.
because there's probably one of the things I would do is I would actually go to like AskArt or one of these databases and see how many Jordan Walkers are
Yeah.
actually out there as artists.
Mhm.
Um, because in some weird way, in the future, it might actually be better to have the Jordan K. Walker because it identifies who you are versus the other for resales and things like that, and things that may not even affect you as a human at that point in time.
Right.
But it might actually, I say keep the K actually.
More specific, the better, right?
Yeah. And so there was one painting, and we might as well talk to people about this. Today, what we're going to talk to you about is, a one-man show, your first one-man show and all that, and what's involved in it, because it's a big deal, which is
Mhm.
why I wanted to do this podcast. I was thinking, you don't get a lot of one first shows like this, you only get one. And
Yeah.
I kind of look at this as your very first show. I don't know. Have you had any shows that were one-man shows?
No, I haven't. So I've been in a lot of group shows, but this is my first real deal one-man show for
Yeah,
sure.
that's what I thought. So I thought,
Yeah.
we should talk about that because that only happens in an artist's life once. Ed's was in 1980 when he did his in like Amarillo, Texas.
Yeah.
I would have loved to hear Ed Mel's, somebody do this then and see what it was like, for him. But I was about to say on your name for Jordan K. Walker, on
Mhm.
one of the paintings that I really love, which is it just and it's like maybe a 20 by 20 or something like that. I don't have the names of them. It has blue background and it has a single tree, which very orangey colors.
Mhm.
It just has your initials,
Oh
JKW.
yeah.
But the
Hmm.
other one below it, which is the same size, actually has their full name.
Yep.
And I assumed it was because the one that just has your initials was because of the colors would maybe be too bright and your name too out on the painting for what the painting was background wise, and that's why you did it. But I don't know.
I like that theory. But the actual reason
There you
is
go.
because I
Always.
painted that before your suggestion of using my full name as the signature. So JKW was what I've been using for years in the front, just because I felt it didn't detract from the painting by having just the initials. And I was afraid that putting the full signature in there might be a little too much, especially in my little 8x10s and stuff like
Right.
that I do. So yeah, but then a few months ago, you suggested that I should probably put the full name in so it's a little more recognizable, which I thought, yeah, that makes sense. So I tried it out a few times and I thought, hey, that actually looks pretty good. So
Yeah.
for the
Okay.
larger
Good.
paintings, I now do the full name.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure that out. Yes, I do
Yeah.
believe that the full name is better. And again, it's historically, I've seen this for Maynard Dixon when he put MD, people are like, well, is that as good or is that just a little sketch? No, I guarantee you, Maynard didn't think that. I've read letters where he wrote, he goes, no, this is just, he actually wrote one where he goes, it was a 16 by 20. And he goes, if you want, you can send it back and I'll sign it. I'm just kind of being humble and just put it, but he goes, this is a full out, painting just as good as any other painting I do. And they
Oh yeah.
never send it back, but so, and there's a few I've noticed that do the initials. And I just wonder in the future if that will be, they don't recognize that they're trying to be humble or whatever, or just not, so in your face. But in the reality is, I think in the long run, it's probably better if there's a full name. And I know you sign yours on the back,
Yeah.
generally you always do, right?
Yep, absolutely. Everything I sign, I put the title, usually put the medium and the varnish that I use as well.
Yes. Yeah. And that's like 90% more, 99% more than anyone else. So, which is good. That's important. Are you keeping a log of all your works?
Yeah, I've got a database on my computer backed up on an external hard drive and stuff like that. So hopefully that'll last a while.
Yes. And how long have you been doing that?
I've been doing that since probably 2016, 2017. Yeah.
Yeah. So a long time. Yeah. Because that's 6 years basically. So, but that's so smart to do those kind of things, I believe, to keep these records. Because, A, you don't know where it's going to go. And B, in the future, you're going to probably have shows, retrospectives. We're talking a long time future, maybe books written, all those kind of things. And to have a log like that, I think is terrifically important. Eric Bowman's good at doing that kind of stuff. So I think, and others are too. Ed Mill does it and others. Sometimes things escape. I know, right? They happen. But generally I think that's a good idea. So back to you and not me, talking about, your first show. So you're 29 now,
Yep.
and you've been painting how long professionally, would you say?
Um, well, let's see. Professionally, I've been doing work since maybe 2012, little bits of illustration work here and there. I kind of transitioned into a lot more of the fine art gallery world stuff, probably around 2019 or so. But
Yeah.
I'd still do some illustration work too. So it's been
Yeah.
both.
And are you doing some sci-fi stuff still?
Yeah, so I'm collaborating with a comic artist friend of mine. He's named Simon Roy, and we're working on a pretty cool book right now. I'm doing all the creature designs and environment designs and stuff like that, and he's actually illustrating the story. But some of my work appears in the book as well, so it's a really fun project.
So you've been basically 11 years doing as a professional, which makes about sense, right? For you to, have your first show. That all kind of lines up, the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, it's over 10 years, it doesn't, you may be 29, but it just doesn't happen overnight, right?
Oh no, absolutely not. And after graduating from art school, I kind of had this idea in my head that a lot of other professionals I was talking to at the time had said, like, it's going to take you about 5 years before you're working full time as an artist. And I had that in my head. And then 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I'm still not full time yet. And, it's now been all that much time. And I'm still trying to kick the day job that I have a couple days a week too. So I'm still working at it. And hopefully this show will make a big difference with that. So,
Yeah. I think it
yep.
will for sure.
Yeah.
Well, you'll find this very exciting. We hung the show yesterday, or day before yesterday. Across from you, where you are, is a show from Josh Elliott. So,
Amazing.
and
I'm
so
looking forward to seeing that.
yeah, right. And it was interesting comparing, looking, and I go, yep, because I can remember when I probably started showing him when he was about 32 or 3, I would think, somewhere in that range. 30, yeah. He's like 48, maybe 49. And I can see his progression too, where he's gone from when we first started showing his work. I mean, you do hit a point and you're just good, right? You're just good. And you can see incremental improvements, and as an artist may be able to see different things that I can't see, but as a general rule, there is a point where you go, yeah, they're just good, and it's just a matter of what kind of subject matter they choose and how they want to approach it. And so you've done it now 11 years, you're having your first show, and let's just talk about how that happened, because part of this, what I want to do, Jordan, is I want other artists out there that might be younger artists have a sense of what the trajectory is, how it happens, what you did to get to this point, and maybe you
Yeah,
could just expound on how you got here with your first one man show opening on October 7th.
sure thing. How early do you want to start?
As early as you want.
All right. Well, I'll start kind of at the end of art school, maybe, because I think there's a pretty solid trajectory into how you get into those kind of schools and stuff like that. But after graduation, and I was an illustration major, there were kind of two options for how I could go. And one of those was try to find a studio to work in, some place that was doing film or video games or something like that. A lot of my classmates ended up going that route. And the other option was to try to go freelance and build up my own name and try to find clients on my own to do work for. I decided that I didn't necessarily want to hang out in a cubicle all day long and work with a bunch of other people in that way. So I went for the route of working from home and could basically live anywhere. And my now wife, Emily Poole, was also an illustration major who graduated with me. So she decided to do the same basic thing. So we moved out to Oregon together because we were interested in exploring more of the natural world out here. It's pretty stuffy in terms of that in Rhode Island. So with that in mind, I spent a while struggling to find illustration clients, sending out lots of letters everywhere, trying to get different companies interested in the work that I was doing. And it's a lot of no response at all, and then some negative response. And occasionally I'd get art directors contacting me back like, yeah, we'd love for you to do this job here or this there. So that for a while was what I was working pretty hard at trying to do, while also improving my ability to paint in general. And during that time, I did have a part-time job that I was working 5 days a week or 4 days a week, depending. And it was really tough to also have time to do all of that art. So over time, that's shifted, and I was able to get it to a point where I wasn't doing the day job so long. I was spending more time on the illustration work and starting to get interested in outdoor plein air painting and landscape painting, because that was always a weak point for me in what I was doing in terms of my illustration. I was doing a lot of science fiction and fantasy work, designing creatures and characters, but I was super weak in terms of environments. So when I was
That's
painting and
changed, by the way.
illustration, yeah, I totally reversed that, right? So I would paint an illustration of some kind of fearsome creature or something, and it would just be sitting in a foggy white haze because I wasn't that great at determining the setting, and I wanted to be much better at that because that was something that a lot of artists I looked up to were really good at, and I wanted to be able to tell stories with that type of thing. So I started going outdoors and painting in plein air, doing work in the studio from photo references and stuff like that, and just using some of the Northwest landscapes out here as inspiration to put into my illustration work. But eventually it started to kind of turn around. I started really enjoying the landscape painting, and I started popping them into the local bookstore to sell some of them, and they were selling pretty well at that time. The prices were kind of abysmal, but it was good for that moment. So I really was enjoying that, and in my illustration work, the jobs I was getting were sometimes jobs that I didn't really enjoy doing at all. They were things that even went against what I kind of believed in and wanted to paint. And I was getting kind of sick of that. There were some companies I worked for that were really wonderful, and I loved working with them and still do a little bit. But yeah, I kind of made the shift in my mind. Okay, I think this landscape painting thing is really cool. And I was learning more about the gallery scene and various other artists. I would visit Jackson Hole every couple of years because my wife's family is from there, and I'd check out all the galleries and be like, "Oh yeah, you can make paintings on your own, and people will buy them and support your work. That sounds like a pretty cool way to go." So I completely shifted my focus in that direction, and instead of contacting art directors, I was starting to contact gallery directors. So that was again a situation of Most of them don't respond. Most of
Right.
them, if they do respond, aren't looking for new artists. So it was kind of the same deal, but just a different industry, a different world. And when I first started contacting different galleries, I probably wasn't quite at the level that they were looking for anyway
Right.
yet. I think that that started to catch up over time as I was doing more work. And you know, I had that day job, but I was also painting for 5 hours some evenings after that, and spending the days I wasn't hiking on the weekends, spent them in the studio painting, right? So the it was. I like to say I've never had a day off because no matter what job I have that you're thinking of, I have three or four other jobs going. I've got so much. So yeah, people always say, oh yeah, are you looking forward to the weekend? You have your days off? It's like, no, I don't have any days off.
No, definitely
I'm
not.
always working, but I wouldn't have it any other way, really. The last few weeks I haven't been able to paint as much as I normally would because I've been shipping and getting things framed and packaged and all that kind of stuff, and catching up on cleaning the house after not doing that for 4 or 5 months working on this show. So it's been kind of weird, and I get this antsy feeling like, oh, I need to make something. So
Right.
later today that'll happen, hopefully. But anyway, yeah, there's just so much constant work that goes into it. And it's not just painting. A lot of it is what I've learned is networking, which doesn't come naturally to me at all. The sending out the emails and the cards and stuff is one aspect of it, but also attending shows, attending conventions, and like talking to people.
Right.
I'm an incredibly introverted person by nature, so it's hard for me to do that, and it's unfortunate that it's hard because it is really important. I think a big part that's helped me is that while I've been doing all this other stuff for the last few years, I've also been a teacher. So I teach workshops in introduction to oil landscape painting. I used to do drawing classes, watercolor classes, and basically anything that the local art centers needed me to teach, I would teach because I had knowledge of it, even if it wasn't the main medium I work in. So doing workshops and long-term classes that I've been teaching for the past 5 or 6 years has really helped me to build up a better ability to talk to people. I think
Right.
it's
Right.
a really good training ground for that.
Well, and I
So
think it's very natural for artists to be introverted and to be able to learn how to do that. I think teaching is a good way. Doing lectures. I'm actually
mhm.
introverted myself, even though you would never know it because it seems like I'm, gregarious, whatever. But no, I'd rather not be doing it. I like this a lot, but
Yeah.
I don't particularly like big crowds and that kind of stuff and those things. I have a tendency to want to not run around the room kind of thing, which is, but what you're doing is right. So you were able to do teaching. I'm sure you get some money. It helps, works in your
Mhm.
craft. It's what you do. But at the same time, it's helped you be able to navigate the world of, talking to people and connecting. Because I agree. I think connecting is very important. And we'll get into that a little bit later because that's one of the reasons you're probably in this gallery. But
Yeah.
yeah, keep going. Tell me the rest. I'm listening.
Yeah, well, so I eventually was able to get my work into a little gallery on the Oregon coast. That's the Mind Power Gallery, and I still have work there now. And had stuff there for a little while. It sells occasionally, but I needed to, expand upon that. I was trying to sell my work mostly myself through various online venues for a little while, and that was just taking too much time away from actually painting, trying to market it and get it
Right,
out. So, the knowledge that I gained was, yeah, I need someone else to do this for me.
right, right,
And I think that once I really honed in on that and was serious about it, I thought about who can I contact that's going to be able to help me get into these galleries because I wasn't able to do it on my own necessarily. And most gallery directors weren't getting back to me, so it's like, well,
right,
I need personal connection because that's what that networking is. That's how so much of any kind of professional dealing in the world in any industry goes on is what I've learned. It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? That saying goes on forever. A lot of times people aren't going to treat you seriously unless they've heard about you from someone else. You want your work to speak for itself, but you also have to speak for your work and get other people to speak for your work in order to really succeed, I think. So yeah, I contacted some other artists and tried to ask them about, what galleries do you work with? Do you know anyone that's taken on artists right now? That kind of thing. And one of those people that I got in touch with was Josh Elliott, who we just mentioned, who I've looked up to for a while. And he was just really nice, real generous. He was gave me a bunch of pointers, and he's like, yeah, these are the galleries I work with, and this is how it works. But also, you should probably be submitting your work to the Oil Painters of America and California Art Club and these other art organizations to help get your name out there and get your work into prominent exhibitions. So I did that, and I was accepted into those organizations and have been for the last few years. Have been showing things with them. Actually, I just had a big painting of the Oregon coast out in the California Art Club exhibition. That was at the Bowers Museum in Santa Ana, and that just ended a couple days ago. And the painting found a new home, which is awesome. So yeah, that's been great. And last year I attended the convention for the Oil Painters of America and was able to network with more artists over there. So I think I really appreciate Josh recommending that, because that's worked out great. Sold work over at the OPA show too. So that's always a good thing. And then the other thing was that, he said, well, I don't really know if the galleries that I have right now are taking on new artists, but we'll keep in touch and let me know if you have more work that you think would fit for one of these places that you're interested in. So a little while ago, I think it was almost a year ago now, I went on a trip to the American Southwest, down through Utah and a bit of southern Nevada and up into the Sierras, where actually a lot of the reference from this show came from. But also, I spent a lot of time in Arches gathering reference for some of the amazing rock formations and stuff. Right. Like, I've always dreamed of going to the Southwest. So this trip was amazing for me. And I kind of had in the back of my mind, okay, I'm going to make some desert paintings because I absolutely fell in love with the desert and have been dreaming of it forever. And I'm going to show those to Mark Sublette because he has a gallery in the Southwest that's really awesome. And maybe he'd be interested in that. So I made a series of paintings specific to the region. And I showed them to Josh Elliott and was like, hey, Josh, do you think Mark would be interested in these? And he said, yeah, that looks great. I'll put in a good word for you if you want to get in touch. So that's what I did. Got in touch with the your gallery and tried to format everything so it was like, yeah, these are paintings that will do well in your market, because you as an artist, you've got to be aware of where you're trying to sell things, who your audience is, right, and all of that kind of thing as well. And then Josh got in contact with you and I think said something along the lines of like, hey, this kid's doing really good work and you should check it out.
What it was.
Yeah. So
yeah, you had sent me an email before I talked to Josh. I remember seeing it and going, oh, this is really unique. It's a different voice here. I can see it. The way you painted it was different. And the subject, I love trees, and that that was part of the subject matter. And I had spent a month in Arches in 2021. So that imagery also resonated with me. In fact, one of the paintings was like, oh yeah, I know exactly where that was. But I got the email, I didn't answer it, but was thinking about it. I showed like my son Charles, and he goes, yeah, this guy's really good. And then about that time, Josh reached out to me and said, yeah, you should look at this kid. Do you know him? I go, yeah, he sent me something actually. And then you sent me another email right after that. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is Christmas. Let's go for it. And I don't think I knew what your age was. It didn't really matter. If you're really, if you're good at what you do as a gallerist, you don't have to judge things on people's age or even their where they went to art school or not. I mean,
Yeah.
Glenn didn't go to art school, right?
Mhm.
I'm judged him on his work. And a lot of artists don't go to art school. You happen to have a great pedigree with that. But
Mhm.
it was the work that spoke to me. And by the way, Josh, when he started in my gallery, it was John Moyers and Terry Moyers who were giving him the thumbs up and saying, "Hey, yeah, you should really look at this kid."
Yeah. Yep.
So he's paying
Absolutely.
he's paying it forward, and
Mhm.
of course he's not going to do that unless he believes in the work. I can assure you. You know,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't think I'm not sure he's ever come to me before. So, but you know, it's that's a good component of where you get to. So anyway, I talk to you, say, yeah, let's see your work, let's do it. And then so
Yep.
you can take up the story from there, I guess.
Yeah, well, from there, I shipped some paintings over to you, and all of your staff bought them
Yeah, they did.
on the spot.
Everybody
So,
wanted one of these.
uh, yep, yep. So I was like, okay, this is solid. This is gold. So I
Yeah,
sent you some more, and
yeah.
it's kind of history from there. I came for a visit right afterwards, and
Yes.
you offered me this opportunity for a one-man show in our first conversation.
Yep.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to be able to do that for young artists, um, to help jumpstart that career and get it going, right? From a financial standpoint, from a gallerist standpoint, often it doesn't make a lot of sense because you look at the price structure and the wall and what it is. But we're looking at, not now, we're looking at 40 years from now, right?
Yeah.
With my son being in the business, we're literally looking, 40 years out. And we know where you're headed. I can see it. I know what's going to happen. It's just a matter of, you're doing it the right way, which is to slowly get awareness and do good work, obviously, and raise prices as things sell out, which they will, and I would have liked to have been in Amarillo, Texas when Ed Mill had his first show, and paintings that were selling for $1,500 and $800, which I've resold for 40 and 50,000. Those paintings, that would have been nice. But it's also
Mhm.
nice to have paintings from an artist, just from a collector standpoint, where you can see this is their earlier work, middle work, whatever.
Yeah.
And I have one of Josh Elliott's from his first show that I bought and kept. And it's a beautiful painting. I love it. And I can see how he's progressed somewhat, from that time frame. I'm sure he would think, oh yeah, much better. But and because it makes sense. But I think that component too is important for gallerists to do that. And if you look, often gallerists aren't going to do that because they just look at it strictly from a financial standpoint and go, doesn't make sense. But from a career standpoint, from a humanitarian standpoint, and from a joy standpoint, I mean, yesterday, which is a Sunday, right? Galleries
Yep.
closed. My wife, one of our good friends, and Charles, and we were all just hanging out, looking at the paintings with no one around us, picking what's the favorite, right? We all had our favorites. Some of them overlapped, some of them didn't. And,
Mhm.
we were all like, oh my God, look at this one. Oh, look at that. Look at this. And, so there was, just from us, that was great joy as a
Mhm.
family to get to do that and to look at them and to really, examine them on our own terms and knowing and understanding, yeah, this is this person's first show and how monumentally important that can be for an artist. And so you're going to have a write up in Western Art Collector, right? What was that like to get, that's probably your first major write up. I'm sure you've had some things listed, but
Yeah, I did do a little snippet in the Southwest Art Collector magazine for the 21 under 31 about a year ago. I did that, but otherwise, yeah, this is my first longer magazine interview too. So that was great. Really nice to be featured in there, and I want to say too, I'm so honored to be a part of your gallery and to have this show. I really appreciate you, uh, you know, reaching out and taking a chance with me because that's so important, like you say, and it makes a big difference.
yeah, though I actually don't feel like I'm taking any chances with you, quite frankly. So I not zero, right? I mean, I already have a couple of your little pieces in my house. So, I mean, you know, I don't put, if they have to reach my house, if they don't reach my house, they don't get in my gallery. So, yeah,
Mhm.
you know, and from a standpoint of what you've done everything right for your first show, which is really important too, just to let our other artists know.
Mhm.
You got all the work on time and early. You were attentive to any things that needed for show components, as far as like the Western art collector and that kind of thing. Everything framed perfectly, matching frames, you know, stayed with the thematic. And then you also worked on the component of the writing, which is what we're the final component that we're putting together right now for the rest of the show. And maybe talk to people about what you and I both discussed about this and the writing, because most artists don't do this, but you
Mhm.
like to write, you like the outdoors, you like biology. So talk about that component of this show too, if you would.
Yeah, well, the written component is an attempt to expand upon what you see visually, right? So the idea here is Deep Time is the name of the show. We're looking deep into history through the vehicle of these trees, because all of these species that I've painted here are the oldest living life forms on the planet. These are some of them individuals that can live to be over 4,000 up to 5,000 years old. Not just, they can sort of keep a population going for that long, but an individual tree
Right.
is that old.
Right.
Like just one being, one entity
Right.
has survived for the time since the Great Pyramids were under construction. Like it
Right.
was alive when that was happening.
Right.
Uh, that's just insane to consider. It's something that we can barely comprehend as such short-lived entities in ourselves, right? Um, so this show is all about how all of these species that can live for incredibly long amount of times are able to do that because of the fact that they're living in harsh environments, places where their growth cycles are really slow, where they have to divert energy from one place where they're growing to somewhere else because some kind of cataclysm has caused their entire trunk to split in half. Well, they got to figure out what to do, right? So yeah, there's just so many interesting aspects that go into the way that these trees live their lives and manage to survive despite everything that gets thrown at them, and in a lot of cases because of it. Because if they were growing in nice protected forests where everything else was growing around them, a lot of these species would rot and die after just 100 years or less. But because they're in these regions where they get preserved by cold, by dryness, things that would be inhospitable to us, but are the key to immortality for these trees, kind of. It's all so cool to think about. And as far as general biology goes, I decided to divide the show into distinct sections based on the types of species of trees that I was illustrating. So we have the five needle pines, which are the oldest species, longest lived. Five needle pines are a group that include white bark pines, limber pines, foxtail pines, bristlecone pines, and a couple others. The white bark is the one I'm most familiar with. I see them the most often. They are really, really cool. They grow specifically in high alpine areas. That you don't see them below tree line really. They just hug that tree line and live in areas where most other things can't, and they create huge alpine forests that so many other species depend on. And they're just incredible to see because they have these amazing twisted Krumholtz forms that they get from the way that they get compressed by snow. Branches break off and fall to the ground. You've got so much pressure from wind pushing them in particular directions. So any of these high alpine tree species are just amazing to look at because of that. And there are some of these white bark pines that can live for around 2,000 years just hanging out.
Mhm.
I've illustrated one of my favorite trees ever, favorite individuals, which is the grandmother tree that lives on the rim of Crater Lake. And that's one of the larger paintings in the show. It's
I know
called
which
the
one it
White
is.
Matriarch. Yeah. And that tree, I've painted that tree from different views at least 5 or 6 times now. And it never gets old because from every angle, she's got something different going on. She has this large section of upper trunk that was just completely crushed by snow at one point, or might have even been a lightning strike or something else like that. And it's created this really weird character, and she's got extra branches and roots coming down off of that. A section on the other side that just sort of swoops up. It's just so cool, and it's like admiring a really great sculpture. You go into a museum and you see some kind of really cool sculptural work. The ones that come to mind for me are like Steve Kestrel, his large scale work and stuff like that. You look at it from every angle, and there's something interesting going on. It's like an abstracted form, but it's also naturalistic, right? I get a similar feeling when I'm looking at great art that I do when I'm looking at these trees, and the fact that they're alive and all of this interesting form has happened through happenstance rather than necessarily any kind of intention. It just
Right.
makes it so much cooler.
Yeah. And do
Yeah.
you have, and one thing, you painted all these trees and cactus because you did saguaro cactus as well, old
Yeah.
cacti, but you painted them all. You saw all of these images, right? All these trees you visited.
Yeah, so everything that I've painted for this show is a place that I've visited, and that goes for most of my more fine art kind of work, the
Yes.
landscape paintings and tree portraits and stuff like that. They're all places I've been to. In my illustration work, I do more imaginative stuff. I take references from other areas, but for all of this stuff, it's all something I've seen, I've touched, I've been there, I've felt the wind. It's important, I think, to be able to get that connection to the space and to the trees themselves as well, because otherwise you can't really portray what's going on super well. Um, but it's also just a pleasant, well, not always pleasant. Sometimes it can be kind of harrowing to be in these spaces, but it you get an emotional connection that you don't get if you don't actually see these things in person. I think it's really
You,
important.
I know at least one of the pieces, there was a nice little plein air piece that went
Mhm.
with the big piece. Do you do that on a regular basis, or do you do sometimes that and or camera work photography?
Yeah, I do the outdoor plein air paintings whenever I can. I can't always though. Sometimes I'm on a trip where I only have 5 or 6 hours in a place and I don't have time to set up a painting. And I want to, in that situation, rather than doing a single painting of a single area, I want to explore as much of the region as I can and see everything from as many different angles as possible, as many different crevices in the rock as I can get into and sort of figure things out. So in those shorter trips, I'm taking photos of everything and I'm bringing that back in the studio. On longer trips, I'll do more plein air paintings out on location in places that I have scouted out and think are supremely interesting.
Mhm.
And I'll spend more time with that because that's how I get information about light and color and the way that things work in a three-dimensional space, because you can actually walk to the left a few feet or to the right, or move around, tilt your head. You see that three-dimensional quality of the things you're painting a lot more clearly than if it's a photo. Everything's flattened out. Sometimes it can be hard to tell what's in front of one, especially further in the distance. So yeah, I definitely like to paint on location when I can, but a lot of what I've done for this show is work in the studio based on various photo references I've kind of cobbled together. I've designed compositions based on that and work on it. But all the outdoor plein air painting influences what I do in the studio. All of my knowledge that I gather while I'm doing that is stuff that I keep in mind and reference while I'm painting. So I might have a plein air painting of a scene that's a forest in Willamette National Forest here in Oregon, and I'll have that out by the easel because it'll influence knowledge about how the light is filtering through the trees in the redwoods of Southern California.
Mm.
So even if I'm not necessarily referencing a plein air painting from the same place as what my larger painting is, I'm gathering information from these little paintings all the time.
Yeah, that one, I assume it's a redwood, the big piece, the vertical that you're looking up at the That's a redwood,
Yes.
I assume.
Yes, that is a redwood. So that's one of the other categories of trees. I had the five needle pines, the coast redwoods, the junipers, and the honorary trees, which are a little different.
Yeah, like saguaros, maybe.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
saguaros.
yeah. That redwood piece is very interesting, especially when you get a light on it. It really pops. So, for those who may not be able to see a vision image of it, and we'll put one up on the podcast, but it's this interesting take from the bottom of the tree up, which in a lot of ways is really the only way you can understand the magnificent size and girth of such a thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so how did you go about trying to figure out that painting specifically when you go, yeah, I want to capture a redwood? Obviously, you came up with that idea, but I mean, it really
Right.
is unique.
Yeah, well, I've got a visual aid here. So
Okay.
this is a smaller study that I did for that
Oh
painting.
yeah. Yeah.
So this isn't a plein air painting. I did this in the studio based on photo references that I cobbled together. But this is that situation where I was referencing some other plein air work to look at this and figure out the lighting effect, the color, the value, all that kind of stuff there. And then I use this as my guide working on that larger piece.
Mm.
So the trouble with redwoods is that they are so big and the forest is so dense that,
Right.
like you say, if you're walking around in there and you're just looking straight ahead, all you see are these massive trunks,
Yeah.
which are cool. And I've done some paintings with that.
Yeah.
I was trepidatious about going into the coast redwood forest, and it was actually not my original plan. I was supposed to do a trip up to the bristlecone forest in the Inyo Mountains, the White Mountains over there in California. But my wife and I ended up getting COVID a few days before we were supposed to go. So that didn't happen. And we figured that with the breathing problems, high elevation wasn't the way to go because that's 11,000 feet up there. It's not easy to breathe, even when you're feeling healthy. So we went down to the redwoods instead because you can breathe better there, and they're also amazing ancient trees, ancient forest. So my original trepidation about going into the redwood forest, though, was that while it's a really cool place to be, it's so hard to find a composition to paint because you're just looking at these giant trunks. You can't see the
Mhm.
entire tree. But then I found this Grove of the Titans to be an amazing place to wander around in, and I found myself looking up all the time. I was looking up
Yeah.
to see what was going on up in the canopy. These trees that have multiple trunks just sprouting out, and the base is wider than a house, right? These
Right.
trunks spreading out up top are bigger than your average Doug fir in
Right.
terms of girth. It's just like it's a forest in and of itself. This single tree that's probably around 2,000 years old and it's been going. There's nothing that can take it down, right? These redwoods, when they get that big, they are incredibly fire resistant.
I
They
know,
can
right?
survive flooding, no problem. That flooding will take out all the little trees around them, but they'll still be there because their root system goes down so deep, holds them in place. They have all these tannins in their bark, so they're resistant to rot and insect infiltration. So they can just live a really long time, even in this moist, humid environment that makes other things rot really quickly, right? So, standing there admiring this thing, this immense entity that's just ancient, I was like, okay, this is going to be really hard, but I've got to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was cool when I found this particular tree was that there was this little sapling growing right next to it, right around the base. And I thought, well, that is just a fantastic illustration of this young tree and its future in 2,000 years if it does a good job, right?
Right.
Because the redwood forest, it's a battleground. There are all these plants growing on top of each other and over each other, and things are competing for resources. Most of these saplings don't live for more than a couple years. They get out competed before they can even, reach the next stage. So it was a matter of me wanting to show the potential that this little one had to lead us into that larger tree and think about all of the time that passes between those two stages of growth. So yeah, I thought this is a matter of having to look up, looking
Yeah.
upward. And I think maybe my background as an illustrator made me a little more willing to try a composition like this, because doing the sci-fi and fantasy illustration work, I'd be doing much more dynamic compositions than what your typical landscape painter would be doing, right? So trying to bring some of that uh, dynamicism into this sort of context, I think was a bit of a stretch. I wasn't sure if I could pull it off, but I wanted to try it. So I did the little study
Yeah.
and I was like, yeah, all right, I can maybe make that work. So bringing it up into a larger scale, I was also thinking about modifying my brushwork because normally I like to use a method called cross contour, where your brushwork is actually describing the three-dimensional planes of everything that you're painting. So it helps enhance the illusion of that two-dimensional surface being a portrayal of three-dimensional things. You'll see it a lot when I'm painting rocks, especially. I get all those facets described
Mm.
as three-dimensionally as I can. I abandoned that a little bit while I was painting this one. I tried to get that three-dimensional structure in the main trunk very strongly, as strong as I could. But then for a lot of the surrounding foliage, I was just going in with super chaotic brush strokes,
Mm.
and trying to get a sense of that claustrophobic, almost random order, but also chaos. Like it's just all these conflicting things going on in that forest canopy because it is so complicated and so dense. So I was doing almost random brushstrokes in some areas and then carving back into them, redefining things. And then I come back a day later and just obliterate it with a palette knife and kind of keep it going back and forth. And that's not a way that I usually work. So this was an experimental painting in a lot of
Mm.
ways for me. And there were stages in the process where I was like, all right, that's definitely not working. And the next day I'd be like, well, let's get rid of it and put
Mm.
something else in and see
Mm.
what happens. So there are a lot more layers in here. Usually I'll do a painting more like alla prima,
Yeah.
kind of get it all figured out in one pass. But this is a layering painting.
Yeah.
I was
Makes
actually
sense.
afraid it wasn't going to dry in time for me to ship it to you guys because it was the last one I did. But luckily it worked out.
Yeah, I could see that now that you describe it, because it
Mhm.
does have a different sense to it. Um,
Yeah,
and it's the layering, that's why. And it allows it to also have that sense of glow in
yeah.
the light and above. And yeah, I thought it was actually exceptionally successful painting. You definitely need light on it. Uh,
Yeah, it's kind of dark.
some things, are in a light in a room that has light. Um, but the take on it's so unusual. And I've been around redwoods. And in fact, Maynard Dixon he didn't do redwoods because it was too hard for him to capture. He did one great drawing that was kind of similar sensibility of looking up.
Hmm.
And yeah, so that makes sense that what you've done on that painting, because it very successful painting. And it's one of the largest paintings in the show, actually, which
Yeah,
you probably have to do. You got to paint a tree that's monstrous. What
yeah,
good is it to, do a little, small one when you can do that? And then you also did a very successful saguaro painting. And that was the first painting, that was the first saguaro that you painted, right? That was that same,
yeah.
right?
So I'm glad you found it successful.
Very
uh,
successful. We all
yeah,
looked at it for a very long time, and we picked out little points. Yeah, you got that right. And yeah, there's the little cactus wren or the woodpecker hole, and there was a little cut, and it was like, yep, that's right. And it's difficult because I know that saguaro, and it's multiple arms and disfigured, and it's a really hard one just to take on. Period.
yeah.
So yeah, what was that like doing your first, that's your first one, right? Wasn't that, I mean, you did the
Well, that
stuff
wasn't my first
before.
painting of it, but that was the first
No, that's what I
saguaro
mean,
that
right?
I painted.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
was
so
sold. Yeah.
my first rendition of it was an on-location plein air painting I did when I went to Tucson to visit you for
Yes.
the first time. I
Yeah.
went out to Sabino Canyon and I found the famous crested saguaro of Sabino
Yeah.
Canyon, and I was like, yeah, that's going to be the first one I do. So I
Yeah. You
I
picked the
painted that one.
hardest one that
Yeah,
you could do for your first one.
yeah,
Bravo.
thank you. It's like go big or go home kind of moment,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So after that, I was really confident because I was like, well, yeah, I was able to do this one, so I can do any other saguaro I want, right? So I did some other saguaro paintings before doing that big one, just to really get more familiar with the form and all of the different attributes they have. And yeah, I went into the larger painting very confidently, and I didn't really do any studies for that one beforehand. I just went straight into the big scale
Yeah.
and was just having a blast working out all of the intricacies of those arms connected to the crisate section, the crested area.
Mhm.
And also, there's the mesquite tree down on the bottom
Yeah.
of that composition, and the relationship saguaros have with mesquites is just really, really amazing to me. So
Trees.
yeah, yeah, mesquites or ironwood trees are these nurse trees for the saguaros. They provide shelter for the seedlings because the seedlings can't grow in the intense sun because
Right.
when they're really young, it's too much for them. So they grow under these other trees, which both saguaro and the mesquite, I think, fall into the category of honorary trees because neither of them are real trees, but they feel like trees. The saguaros are cacti, of course, but mesquites are legumes. They're related to peanuts,
Yeah.
so they're not trees in the sense of a conifer or a deciduous tree. They fall into that broader umbrella of not quite a tree, but might as well be, right? And they're just cool in themselves. They got these nice twisty branches that
Yeah.
form
Oh
these
yeah. No, they're fantastic.
yeah, yeah, they're great. So they shelter the saguaros, and then as the saguaro matures, it eventually, after like 50 to 100 years, grows taller than the nurse tree, and it outlives the nurse tree. The nurse trees, the mesquites only live for about 200 years max, so they die. And then these sort of skeletal remains of these trees are always accompanying anywhere where you see big saguaros because that tree was the way that the saguaro was able to get its start in life, and now it's a reverse, right? So
You'll see Palo Verdes do it as well.
yeah,
They'll
yeah,
all
yep,
be thirst trees, and they don't live that long either.
yeah. I think they're also legumes if I remember correctly. They're
Probably
kind of
so.
related.
Yeah, they're
Um,
definitely different.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. They've got this cool green foliage to them, and I didn't paint any of those for this show, but I've definitely got some Palo Verde paintings coming up. They're really neat.
Yeah, and those trees will even affect the way that the sorrel looks, right? Because
Hmm.
depending on where it's growing, it has to get through the canopy of the tree, so it has to work around that tree.
Yeah.
And I've there's a spot where I play golf, and the saguaros are all kind of bent and weird. And I'm asking my partners, well, why are they? And they're all coming up with ideas. And I go, no, you're missing the point. I go, look at the base. See where that old tree was? That was a
Yep.
big Palo Verde, and it forced its hand on these saguaros, and when it died, that's why they look like that. And they're like, oh,
Yeah. Absolutely. It's so
golf should
cool.
be when you're playing golf, you better be looking at things like flowers and saguaros and coyotes and rattlesnakes and all that stuff, because that's 2/3 of the fun of golf. I
There you go.
you know
Yeah. I would agree with you. For me, that would be pretty much all the fun of
Yeah.
golf. But
Well,
yeah.
some days it is all the fun of golf, even when you golf. It's like,
Yeah.
well, I did see a coyote. That was cool.
Yeah. No, I think that the Sonoran Desert is fascinating because there are all of these species that are interconnected in all of these really weird ways. And that's true in most ecosystems. Everything kind of
Yes.
influences everything else. But I think it's really visible in the Sonoran Desert just because some of these the skeletal remnants of the trees and the saguaro and everything, they last a really long time in that environment. They don't decompose quickly. So you can see the history of all of these different interactions just right there on the bare earth or the cryptobiotic soil, or it's just all there at all times. None of it's hidden, which is really cool to see.
So when you're doing this show, did you feel pressure to, okay, I got to do this? I mean, how did you make it happen so you were on time, you had everything done? Because you also have another job that you're working on, so how
Yeah.
did you do that, and what kind of pressure did you feel? I'm sure there must have been some of that, right?
Oh yeah, a lot of pressure, absolutely. I think that I'm kind of used to deadlines from illustration work and stuff like that. So I'm fairly comfortable with it. But this was much more of a long-term deadline than what I'm used to. So from when you mentioned that we could have the show to now, it's been I think about 7 months at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, I would
So
think
that
at
was
least.
a pretty big span of time to try
Yeah.
to fit things in. And originally I came up with a schedule. I was like, okay, I'm gonna spend this week doing studies, and I'm gonna
Right,
spend this week doing a finished painting, and then this week's gonna be a
right,
trip for plein air painting. That fell apart after the first couple months because other things come up. I had other shows I was starting to do paintings
right,
for, and illustration work and teaching and other stuff. So it all it all became very mushy because with the way all of the work I do ends up lining up, there's never a set schedule because something new will come up and
right.
change all the other things. Um, so I kind of threw the schedule away, but had in mind, okay, I need to have this number of paintings finished by the end of this month, or else I'm in trouble. So
Right.
every month I tried to stick to a quota of kind of creating at least two or three of the smaller paintings and one of the bigger paintings.
Yeah.
And some months I went over that with the time I was able to have. Some months I went under that, but I was always trying to keep with a general monthly goal.
Yeah.
And
We have like
I'm doing it.
25 paintings in the show, I think.
25. Yeah, the goal was 20. So I surpassed it. That's another thing I learned doing illustration work, which is I think applies very well to this world too, which is always to under promise and over deliver.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, no. I wish
yeah.
more artists would do that. Usually it's kind of a flipped.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't
Two
want
months
that to
out, they're
ever
like,
happen.
I can't get you, it's like, and then the other part that's difficult, especially for a younger artist like yourself, is that you don't have any money coming in, not much money coming in from sales, right? You're sticking all these paintings away, right?
Yeah. Yep. That was the thing, because I I would normally be trying to sell some of these paintings online myself if they weren't in a gallery yet, or I'd be putting them
Sure.
in galleries if I could.
Yeah.
But I'm holding on to all these for a lot of months. So yeah, I was trying to do other paintings in the meantime as well, that I could potentially send to other places. So yeah, I haven't had a lot of money coming in. You're right about that. And
Yeah, take care of that. Don't worry. That part's gonna
all
go.
right, excellent.
Yeah, that part I'll guarantee will go away. But and also frame costs, right?
Yeah, that's a big one. I have a framer up in Olympia, Washington, who does most of my frames for me, and all of them for this show are his. So shout out to the Old Plank Woodworks. He does amazing work. You can find his stuff on Etsy, and it's really nice because I've been able to develop a kind of almost signature frame style with him.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll probably modify it more over time, but I've got this type of frame going that I don't see anyone else really using. And I
Yeah,
was
it's a
able
pretty
to,
frame.
yeah, thanks. And thanks to Mark, the other Mark, my framer Mark. But the idea there was that all of the carving in the frame will sort of echo some of the brushstrokes that I have in the
Yes.
painting and bundle it all together a little bit
Does he
more.
hand carve those little chips out?
Yeah, he uses a little gouge,
Yeah.
and
What it looks
yeah, yeah. Yep. And I've tried making some frames myself, and I wish I could more. I really enjoy woodworking. I work with traditional hand tools, so planes and chisels and gouges and all that kind of stuff. I've got one way up. I don't know if you can see it up there.
not yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
way up at the top. That
Yeah.
that's one of my frames that I made.
Is
But
that an
I
elephant?
Yeah, it's got the elephant. So I'll just take it down. This was something I made a couple of years ago, and
Uh-huh.
you can see I've got
Come bring it
um,
back toward you.
yeah,
There you go. Oh yeah.
yeah. So working with trying to get different ridges and things that are echoing some of the forms happening in the painting,
Yeah.
in the molding of the frame itself. So I really enjoy making the frames. I just don't have time to because on
Yeah,
top of
that's the
everything else.
problem.
Yeah, I wish I could make my own frame for every painting that I do, but I've got to find someone else who can do it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
No,
that's another thing.
no, from a just a financial point, it'll never, I don't know about never, but it would be unlikely that it would ever pay off to do that.
Yeah,
So what a lot of artists do, most of my artists, I think, do is they develop a signature style frame that they like. They find a framer that they like, and then that person makes that frame for them.
yep,
So you have the input as an artist, how you see it and visualize it. It is your frame, it is your concept, but you don't have to do the work.
exactly. Yeah, so
Just like
that's pretty much what I'm heading toward with it now, because that frame I just showed you, I spent 5 times longer on that than on the painting that's in it. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
yep, yep.
So, what are your expectations when you have a show like this? You know?
Well, I hope that people enjoy it.
Yeah.
Uh, that's huge. I hope that people enjoy it enough to take all of these home with them so that I can make more paintings.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's
um,
true. It is, people have to realize if you don't buy the work for artists, it makes it very difficult for them to be artists.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's kind of it's it's weird because a lot of people think, oh, you're an artist, you just do it because it's fulfilling and that's what matters. And it's like, well, yeah, it is fulfilling and that does matter a lot, but it's the way I've organized my life to make my living, right? So that's an incredibly important part. And I think that it's really cool if you have if you have the means to support an artist, you can get so much fulfillment from doing that.
Yeah, it's
I
true.
think you can speak to this better than I can, but you know, I do collect a little bit of art when I can, and it's just such a fulfilling thing to have in your environment and think somebody made this by hand in order to express their vision of the world, and you
Yeah.
can find that connection. Yeah.
Yeah. And these pieces are pieces that you literally went out and communed with the tree
Hmm.
and thought about for a very long time which trees, or in some cases, cactus, get to make the cut for your very first show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
Yep. And I have so many so much more reference material that I haven't tapped into yet, that I definitely will be for future paintings. And I've got a lot more trips that I want to go on, a lot more places I want to explore, and there's always ideas flowing in my brain of things that I'd like to do. So hopefully I
yeah.
can get to do a fraction of them in my lifetime.
Right. Well, and again, just from a standpoint of I've been doing this 30 plus years now, and to see the first show and know that's the inaugural show, all these paintings have kind of a special, will always have a special place, I'm sure, in your heart, but also just for the record books too, right? I mean, Ed Mel remembers every painting when I show him, and it's from that 1980 show. Oh, yeah, that was that one. I remember that, you know. And he probably doesn't remember all his paintings now because he's, done so many over so many years. But that first show, especially, has significant for you historically and for me, which is why we're doing this podcast. Actually, I thought, what a great, you only get it once, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and
Yep.
you're
Yeah,
this,
I'm super excited. I can't wait to see it.
yeah, no, it's beautiful. You did lovely work, and I'm very, very proud of you and what you've accomplished, and for this show. You did everything that a gallerist could hope for, and I will, just if you can bundle that and keep it inside you for whatever shows you do for everyone, just being on time and being very conscious of what you want to do and really putting in the effort makes it all worthwhile for for me, and it also makes it easier for me to sell your work, by the way. When if you show up, if it shows up a week before or 5 days before or the day, sometimes it
Sure.
makes it harder for us to do our job, which is to get the word out and let people know. Yeah. So
Well,
any
I really
final,
appreciate all that, Mark. I think people have this impression that artists are kind of wishy-washy and not professional, and I'd like to dispel that if possible, because I
yeah,
think that's anybody who's like that isn't going to get very far in most
that makes it
cases.
very difficult. And
Yep.
usually the artists, and I have quite a few of them that are illustrators, are the very best at doing that, at getting things on time and meeting deadlines, and because they had to do it. Yeah.
Yep.
So any final words for people out there, maybe artists that are, in your shoes, or, getting to that point where they're about to get their first show, maybe?
Yeah, I would say going back to talking to people, once you get your work to a point where you feel like you're doing really good stuff, and you feel like you are on par with the other artists that you'd like to show alongside, you have an idea of where you'd like your work to be. You have to talk to people, and it's really hard. But it makes the difference. So all those emails, the sending postcards, contacting people, talking through social media, on the phone, meeting people in person, going to events, all of that kind of thing. I think that it's a lot more important than I gave it credit for in the beginning, and uh, I I think it makes all the difference. So do good work, but also tell people that you're doing it, and
Yeah.
make sure people know,
Yeah,
because
sure.
it's not going to find you.
Yeah, and I think that having a very active social media presence is important. And you're
Yep.
very good about doing that too.
Yeah, I do my best. I've dropped off in the last little while I've just been kind
Yeah,
of getting
getting
stuff
your
ready for
one
the
man
show over
show.
the last few weeks.
Right.
But hoping to get back into more regular social media posting, and I've got a newsletter that's a few months overdue and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you can keep up with that, I think that is definitely really helpful and important.
Yeah, and give them your Instagram account so they can go to it.
Yeah, so it's Jordan K. Walker Art.
There you go. Okay.
And yeah, and some variation of that is all my other social media as well. And
Yeah.
my website is jordankwalkerart.com, and you can find links on there. So
But if you want his art, you got to go to Medicine Man Gallery because we have basically everything right now.
you got it. Yeah, if you have a look around my studio, like there's hardly anything on the walls. Usually all these walls are completely covered, but I've just got like a couple things right now.
Yeah.
Not nearly as much as usual. So they're all at Mark Sublette Medicine Man Gallery for the show Deep Time, opening October 7th. Come join us. I'll be there.
Yeah.
It'll be good.
Oh, yeah. And maybe, just maybe, we can go out and round up a Gila monster.
That would be amazing. I
I
would love
know,
that.
right? That's the
Yeah.
perfect time. First week in October, excellent time.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Emily will be excited to do that too.
yeah.
So we'll have to set that up.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I'll go out with you again. Thank you, Jordan. I
Thank
appreciate it.
you, Mark.
And I can't wait to see your face in person.
Me too. It's going to be great.
All right. Thanks very
All
much.
right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.